Well, I was just speaking with someone about that literature review and that spreadsheet. Um, I, I I think the hardest challenge that doctoral students have, the ones that I know in the U.S., and it comes for them in the third year of their program. And I know that your program is different, and so yours comes in the first year of your program, which is even that much harder. But there's a sense of what's your question? What do you want to address? And that's why I spent the front part saying, what's the story of your life? What are your commitments? What do you care about? Go look at the journals, find articles you wish you read, trying to get some sense of where, what you want to do. But what happens is, as I mentioned with this idea, it's a little kind of glib and pejorative, but this excellent sheep phenomenon, people are so good at being students and telling professors what they want to hear. When it comes time to ask your own question, it's very difficult. And as I've encountered doctoral students over the years, I sometimes get frustrated because they don't have any ideas, or it seems like they don't have any ideas. And I say, well, come on, there's a million ideas. Just find something, get it started, and then we'll work with those ideas. And in part, they may not have ideas because no one's ever asked them for their ideas. In part, they may have ideas, but they're afraid to share them because they lack the confidence to share them. And so then the question is how do you create an environment where people have the confidence to put themselves out and then find something to build? That's one challenge. But the other one is how can you create the context where people can discover their questions for themselves? And so there's a colleague at Stanford who's a very, 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 very productive researcher and is known for training lots of doctoral students. And so I asked her, she's actually the most cited professor in all of management. She has more citations for her work than any, at least when somebody did that assessment of that a few years ago. She's the most person in management. And I said, Kathy, what's the secret here? How do you find these doctoral students to get their ideas? Because I have trouble with students finding their own ideas. And she said, I start with literature reviews, is that when they get into an area that they have their own intuitions and where they have their own interests, is start with something like this, just to come to understand the conversation as to what's going on. But it's born of their own intuition, and then once they are aware of kind of what they want to know, they found those 5 articles they wish they'd written, have them engage that literature and see what's been said and where the conversation is. Because as I said in the beginning, conversation, that might be a way to start for you as you're looking to find your idea. Because the challenge is you have your own idea, which can be just fine, but then you have to enter the conversation and you need to know what other people have been saying about it. And your idea may have been an idea from 1987 that's been developed. But then as you read that literature, you'll say, well, actually, as I think about it, then this is where my idea takes us, and then you're in. But you might start by honoring your intuitions and then engage that literature, and then and you're kind of like a detective. You just start reading, and then you start seeing what other people have said, and you might put together some version of the spreadsheet just to get a sense of what people are find very quickly of the field where the conversations are, and you can look at their future research directions and their current papers and what they're saying, and then you start talking to these people. That's the other thing, by the way, is don't be shy. It's something called the Invisible College, and I am actually your colleague. I am a part of the Invisible College, and I mentioned I've known Moses for 6 years, so I know what goes on here because he's a graduate of this place and knows people. But it's rare, actually. It's surprisingly rare that people will just write out of the blue and say, I read your work and I'd love to talk to you about your work. And I'll tell you, 99 out of 100 people, whoever it is, if you honor them and you say, I've read your work and I'm really interested in the question and your take on it, and I'd love to talk to you about it someday, people will talk to you. Anybody will talk to you. It could be a Nobel Prize winner. And people are busy and they got a lot to do. But if you write a letter that's heartfelt and you show you've done your homework and you have an interest, and then even there, play the Ghana card. I'm sitting here in Ghana and I don't know anybody in the University of Chicago or whatever, but I'd like to talk to you about this. People will answer. They're flattered that somebody read their work. Now, if you go for the Nobel Prize winners, they get dragged into a lot of things, and there's a lot of ceremonies and all of that. So they may be harder to reach. But just your average professor, if you reach out and say, I'd like to talk to you sometime about this work, they'll respond. And then you have a conversation. And then you can say, well, I'm thinking about this or that. And then there's a downside of everything. You know, sometimes you got to be. I know people, and these are in finance more than in management, but they're worried about protecting their IP, and they don't share their ideas for fear that someone's going to steal them. So you can, you know, deal with that. But you could talk to somebody if there's some rapport. You could say, well, I'm thinking about this or that. What do you think about that, this or that? And anybody, any ideas as to what I should read or who I should talk to? And you know, you can find your way in. And you know, not everybody will respond, but somebody will. And next thing you know, you've got maybe a mentor out in the world. So that's how that goes. So don't be shy, but you got to do your homework. You don't just call up out of the blue and say, I saw your name in the papers and tell me about what you do. You know, that doesn't do it. But show you've read their work and there's a reason to talk to them. They'll be flattered and then go. To my wife, actually, in Belgium, the way their PhD system works, they have money from the Belgian government, I guess, and in their third year, they don't have fully the training to train doctoral students, and they want their doctoral students to go somewhere else for a year and sit in residence at some other university, and they're fully funded by the Belgian government to go do this. And so my wife actually got a call one day or a note from a woman from Belgium that she did not know, and then said, I'm studying what you're studying, and revealed all this interest in her work, and then actually said, I'd love to come to Michigan for a year. And sometimes you get those requests, and you go, oh, you know, what's this? But there was something about her sincerity and depth and of commitment in the letter that she wrote. My wife said, oh, well, let's talk. And next thing you know, they've written 3 papers together. We went on sabbatical. We were in Belgium for 4 weeks. We were in for 2 weeks. We're tied in. She's a family friend. And that was just out of the blue, because their deal is they have to go reach out, and they found someone. But she was dead serious about what she was doing. And then she came to Michigan, and that was that. And that was a year. So if you're serious, people will respond. If you're not, they'll smell that in a second, and then they won't give you the time of day. So there's that. Okay, in the spirit of just trying to continue to share whatever I know with you and the time we have, what's next? Oh, well, this ties into what we were just talking about. There's that 47-page dossier of the 10 short articles or whatever it is. One is called Publishing in this Journal for Non-U.S. Authors. And this actually gets directly at the question we just addressed. And it's beware construct in country and comparative country appraisals. A lot of times people think, here's a sample from Ghana, and of course you want to know about Ghana. Well, there's 100, depending on how you count, 115 countries in the world, and you go, okay, well, there's got to be some other reason than just that, unless it's Sino-Ghanaian joint ventures in the oil industry, and everybody cares about that, and then maybe, but it's even that's a special journal that will care. And then you may want to be looking at how the Norwegians handled their big find of oil and how Ghana is doing it, and you get a comparative assessment of, or do something that, but this is the editor of AMJ who came from another country, and he was editing the journal and said, this is what he's seen. So he said, just straight, people think that it's interesting, and it is for a field journal maybe, but not for the theory-based journals. And then to the papers is beware theory development by citation. And that's a sentence, it's an easy sentence to say, and then that's the nuance of how to enter a conversation. But I mentioned earlier that editors will often bend over backwards for doctoral students, and they won't for senior people who should know better. You can always spot a doctoral student work that comes in by one. There's one tell. If you're like a detective and then or you're a poker player, and there's the tell as to there's what kind of cards does this person have in their hand. The tell is paragraphs that begin with authors' names. If you see papers where paragraphs begin with authors' names, what they're doing is they are just describing the terrain, and then they'll say and that's what's in the chapter 2 of the dissertation. This is the world of institution theory. It started with Meyer and Rowan in 1977 did this, and then it turned into DiMaggio and Powell in 1981 did that. Then it turned into Christine Oliver in 1991 did this and that, and then off where they'll talk about the efficient market hypothesis, and then there's the strong form, and then the weak form. And they're just giving you a tutorial about efficient markets, or they're giving you a tutorial about institution theory. And then that can be a part of your doctoral education, because it's back to those earlier questions. You have to know what went on in that area. But you're entering a conversation, and then your article is a conversation with a purpose, and you're engaging that community, and they already know what's been said, so you don't want to just recapitulate that. And so you'll see a lot of times it's just citations. You'll actually see boxes and arrows and diagrams. And those boxes and arrows models, they actually look like a model, but they're just describing the different paradigms. And that can be useful if it's an article a review. I'm going to sit down if you don't mind if it's staying for a while. It's useful if it's a review, because they're saying, well, the field is comprised of the following 7 big areas, and here's the work in there, and this 7 buckets, and this bucket's full, and this one's kind of empty, and this one's half full, and they'll describe it. But a theory is about a why. It speaks to the why relationship. And so if you're not articulating a why about a set of relationships at the constructs or variable level, it's not really theory. And so you'll see citations, and you'll see a lot of boxes and arrows, and they're just describing the world. And again, that's chapter 2 of a dissertation to show you've done your homework, but you don't have an original idea that's coming out. My first job as an associate editor was with this journal called Academy of Management Review, which is a theory journal, and I had been on the board of the Academy of Management Journal prior to that. And in there, that's an empirical journal. So in an empirical journal, there's something called the fatal flaw, and you read it, and there's something in the methods, and you say, well, this is flawed. We no can do. You can't make any inference from these data until they fix their design or whatever it is. In a theory paper, I remember thinking, where's the flaw? You can just keep writing and writing and writing and writing and writing and writing. Well, the flaw is, the fatal flaw, and I couldn't believe it until I saw it with my own eyes, is there's no idea. There's no idea. They've got articles and citations, and they're packaging them and moving them around, but there's no original idea there. So sometimes if you want, for inspiration, go look at a law review article. Just pick up any, like the Yale Law Review, well, it's the Yale Law Journal, the Harvard Law Review, or the University of Chicago Law, Stanford Law Review Journal. Pick up one of those, and then the way they do it in law is they have footnotes, which is where all the connection to the scholarship is, and that's all in the footnotes. And then there's usually a line on the page, and when you look at them, and there's a half of the page will be text, and down below is all the footnotes where they're engaging the literature. But it forces them to have an idea that's written in prose above the line, and all the connection to the literature is below the line in the footnotes. And when I encountered that, that's not the way we write in any of our fields. But I said, oh, that actually smokes it out. If you don't have any idea, you have nothing to say above the line. But what happens in a lot of these papers, it's all below the line. They're manipulating things. So, but people think that that's a contribution, and it's not. And then there's a lot of attention to qualitative research, born of the interest in this setting. And then that's fine, but there's 2 articles in there, and there's a lot of work comes out of qualitative research. And some people think it's easier because you have to learn all the stats and stuff. It's a world unto itself. There's 2 articles in there that talk about qualitative research, and the way that works typically is you start out saying, I'm interested in some phenomenon, and then you go in and you do a deep dive, and then at the back end is theory development. And so good qualitative research papers, there'll be theory at the back, born of their rich description in the front end. But if you just describe a phenomenon, you're kind of a journalist. And so you'll see some papers that don't have any kind of theoretical intuition, or they're not trying to advance a conversation. They don't go anywhere. But you may have a very compelling setting. And then yesterday there was a conversation about somebody looked at Ashanti funerals and looked at the business around funerals, Ashanti funerals, and then was trying to say something about entrepreneurship, but they described all about the Ashanti funerals, but didn't make the connection to entrepreneurship and what you can learn from it. So the paper was rejected, but I'm sure that was rejected with great consternation, because the context is so interesting. Because who in the world knows about Ashanti funerals? But you got to be able to tie that into the literature about entrepreneurship and say something about that, and they didn't. It was just a description of Ashanti funerals. So then you're an anthropologist. That's all very interesting, and you compare that to Joseph funerals or whatever, and that's fine. That's not business. So, and then we've already talked about the presentation, the house style of the journal. There are, and maybe I'll do this. I've got a couple of papers to show you, but just look at the journal and see how they write. If you pull up, just depending on your, if you look at a management science journal, there's a certain flow to them, and there's a certain structure of how they do it. If you look at Journal of Finance, which is a little bit different than Journal of Financial Economics, there's a flow and a structure to those. If you look at an ASQ article versus Academy of Management Journal article versus an organization studies, they're just different. There's a different recipe to them. And so all I can say there is once you realize where you're reading, who your people are, where the conversation is, deconstruct, try to figure out what the recipe is. And sometimes you can ask your professors that know this, but your professors may not. But then if you ask me to say what's the house style of organization studies, I've never published in organization studies, I would do exactly what I told my doctoral students to do. I would go look at 10 or 20 articles over time, and I'd just deconstruct what are they doing, how do they do this, and then do my best effort to try to write it, and then you go forward. Pause point here, and this gets to the fact that I'm here. We're in a community here, and so if you look at these papers again in these top journals, and the top journals is where you see this more than elsewhere. Look at an acknowledgement section. There's always an acknowledgement section at the bottom of the first page or at the end, and then they are thanking, say, 10 people who read their paper, and then they may be thanking 5 or 6 universities for inviting them in to talk about their work. So what that's saying is, you write your paper, do the best you can, and then you should develop a set of colleagues that will read your work and tell you the truth about it. And then that's hard to find them when you're first starting, and it may be people at your level, and you got to find who's smart that you trust. Because what can happen is, and we'll talk about this in just a little bit, this can be very, very hard work, and it can crush your spirit. And so a lot of times your friends will say it's great because you're feeling bad. But you really don't, if it's not great, you want to be told it's not great before you send it out into the review process. So you got to find people that you can trust, you can expose yourself to them, they expose yourself to you, and then you read each other's work very critically. As you develop and you develop your network, then you start to get exchange relationships with others. So I have a group of people that I deeply, deeply respect, trust, at this point in my career I could care less, but I mean, no worry about face and stuff. And I can say, okay, I'm stupid. Tell me I'm stupid. It doesn't matter. Just please tell me I'm stupid. Just tell me how to make this thing better. And then I will read their work in exchange. And we don't do this all the time, but if I've got something that really matters to me, there's a short list of people that I will go to that I know will read my work extremely carefully and will give me feedback, like extraordinary feedback, and it's a total gift, and I honor it and I don't abuse it. But then I'll thank them in the paper. And then sometimes universities will invite you to go give a talk, and then you give the talk, and then you get in a room full of people, and they start firing off all these questions at you. And go, oh, slow down there, Bob. I didn't know that. But then you go home and you think it through. So that's the other part, is you're doing this as a part of a community. So share it with people and get feedback, and you want to make it as good as it can be before you send it to the journal. You don't send out a first draft to a journal. And then that, to the last part about the mutual knowledge, that goes to the earlier question about how much of the literature do you know. Once you're in, that's the conversation. You know whatever else is talking about, and you'll find there's foundational work in that area. You should know the foundational work. You're part of that community, and so it's just like anything else. You pay your dues, and you learn about it, and then your writing will reveal a kind of confidence where you don't have to do a tutorial on the 1977 Meyer and Rowan paper, but as you write, it'll be clear you've read it and you understand it, and it's just embedded in what you do, and that just comes with time from doing it. But if you don't have that knowledge, you've only read the last 3 papers, and you're trying to write the 4th paper, it will show. But if you haven't been trained and you don't do this routinely, it shows, and then people say, "What is this?" So it's hard. And so we'll talk in a little bit about the secular aspects of our work that make it so hard to do this. But I'm just talking at the sacred level as to what's in play. So that's why papers get rejected, and they get rejected right out of hand immediately. Constructing country, the theories are just citations and packaging past work. Doesn't match the style in terms of the flow and the structure, and there's a sense, it's back to the citations, they don't fully understand what they're talking about because they haven't read deeply necessarily. But this is where you can start getting nervous. It's like, well, to do all of that, that's a lot of work for 1 paper, and then you have to write 2 a year to get, I'm aware of that, so we can talk about that too. I will give this to you. I put this out, and I'm going to give you this deck so you can just see this. But this was an article that was written that said the title is "What Theory Is Not," and it's not references, it's not data, it's not a list of variables, it's not diagrams, and even it's not hypotheses per se. And so there's an article. I can even send you the article, but there's a sense there too, is it's answering the why question with some confidence is what's in play. And it's one of these things, you know it when you see it. When you see lists, when you see a bunch of references and some data flying around, and it doesn't go, you go, what is this? But when you're writing it, it can seem like it's something until you realize it's nothing. And then so these kinds of papers are useful. The other thing you should know when you go to build a theory, this is my colleague Carl Weick, he just retired. He's a luminosity in our world. He had the observation that no theory can be simple, accurate, and generalizable. That these are the qualities of a good theory, and you're straining to do all 3. But his intuition was you can only do 2, and so there's always going to be a limitation. That if you've got a simple and accurate theory about something, the chances are it's a simple and accurate description of something as small of a pixel, and it doesn't generalize out to the. But if you've got something that's accurate about a complex general phenomenon, chances are it's not simple. And so there's actually a quote I use with my students all the time to that one is, and this is a U.S. Supreme Court justice from 100 years ago, and I see if I can get this direct. It's slang from 100 years ago. He said, "I would not give a fig. I wouldn't give anything. I wouldn't give, a bucket of spit or whatever." He says, "I would not give a fig for simplicity on this side of complexity, but I give my life for simplicity on the other side of complexity." So and that's back to the top journals. You're straining to find some parsimonious insight that goes across all the complexity, and that's what you're trying to find. You have to find simplicity on this side of complexity, say, oh, it's all efficient markets, or it's all power, or it's all this, and it's all, if we only had, this group in power, or that group in power. It's like, oh, God, shut up, because they see something simple, but they don't see the complexity of what's in play. There's a nice line in there. One term, a famous quote is, "You can be a useful ferment in a lethargic mass." It's important to hear that point of view, but you're not going to entrust that. Just back to being a teacher, you don't entrust anybody to lead that has simplicity on this side of complexity. You want people with wisdom straining for simplicity on the other side of complexity. But our theories, it's hard to do this, and so it's important to recognize this too. Is you're straining for all 3, but you're probably just going to get 2 of them, and so a boundary condition may be one of them. And so just to know, it's never going to be perfect. Okay, so now we didn't even talk about this yesterday. I now want to talk about theory development and scholarship in context, and then the struggles that you face here, and it's the struggles that I face in the United States. It's all over the place, and we have to figure out a way as to how to be our best selves, how to be the teachers we want to be, how to be the scholars that enter conversations and help change the world, honor your intelligence, all of that, in the light of these pressures that are on us. And so I just put this on the table. Maybe we can talk about how to do this. So for starters, does anybody here had psychology? You know, do you know this expectancy theory of motivation? Have you ever seen this? It's the basic, you know, in organization behavior 1 or HRM 1, students will encounter this, and there's a fancier version of this, but this is the intuition, and I think it's a powerful intuition, and it speaks volumes about the world of higher education today and the world that we're living in as we try to do this work. And I really want to get this on the table, because otherwise I can come in and spew all this, tell you how to do it, and then you'll say, well, that's all very nice where he lives, but that doesn't say anything about where I live. This guy's dreaming. It was nice to meet him. It's time for him to go. So at least I'm aware of that. So I want to at least honor the connection we're in. And truly, my environment is similar to your environment. It's different, but it's similar. So here, this is the model of motivation, and the intuition's important to note. So you've got performance. You're trying to get somebody to do something. So in this case, you want them to be a scholar, or say you want them to publish research. So that's the performance. Is I want to have research, high quality research, changes the conversation, that can serve as a platform for policy, and it's subtle and sophisticated, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Fine. The nature of that, there's two things in play. One is on the left is your effort. So the theory says, and this gets in the top journals, because this is maybe transcends culture and context, and et cetera. And you can apply it to being a professor. You can apply it to making bricks. It says, if you're an individual looking at this, you say, okay, what's the probability that given a level of effort on my part, I will achieve this performance objective? And if it's high, then you're going to do it. But then it's probably quadratic. If it's really simple, you say, that's boring, it's too easy. Or if it's really, really hard and it's impossible, you say, forget it. So there's probably some optimum level of moderate difficulty where it's a challenge and it's engaging. And so part of your challenge as a doctoral student is you're on a learning curve and you're coming in and you go, this is too hard. But you say, oh, hang with me, it's not that hard. And if you just work a couple of years, you'll get there. So there's subtlety and some nuance in there. But there's the front end is saying, given a level of effort, can I do this? And so then for what we're doing here, that's everything we've been talking about is, given that your level of work, can you do it? And so on the one end, there's ability, and so the one is, how smart are you? So you got admitted to the program. People think you're smart enough. When you applied, they think you're creative enough. They think you're enthusiastic. These are all criteria. Our criteria, we have 4 criteria to get into our PhD program. I can might as well say this. One is, are you smart? Test scores, grades in college, and that's kind of just a given that you're smart. You have that. 2, do you have some idea of what it is you want to do? Some notion of what your research agenda is. But that's important, so they're self-possessed. They have some sense of their quest, but we know that as soon as they walk in the door, it could change immediately. But then 3, related to that is there a fit between what that person wants to do and what we're good at this university? And so we had a person, I was on the committee this year, and wanted to do a certain kind of simulation modeling with respect to organizational analysis. And we said, this person's plenty smart, fully committed, wants to do that. I said, we don't really do that here. And so we rejected the person. The person got rejected from the University of Michigan and probably got accepted at MIT or someplace. But we just said, we can't help this person, and so go somewhere else. But then there's the 4th, which is the one that's the hardest, and we actually looked for it. And it's the incandescent spark of creativity. Is there something that's unique, that they see the world differently, that they got ideas? We're looking for that. And the letters of recommendation will speak to that. And then their essay will speak to it. And then we talk to these people when they get to be the finalists. And we just bat ideas around. Are they creative? Are they clever? Are they quick? Do they see things? Are they, the enthusiasm and the curiosity and all that sort of thing. So you have that ability level. And then there's training. So you have some raw materials, and then you train. And so with training, you can say, okay, as I'm looking at this, given a level of effort, can I write, subtle and sophisticated journal articles that will change the world? And you go, okay, I think I can do that. But that's not the whole story. Then it's the second half, is then given a level of performance, then this goes to the outcomes. What do I get for it? So what are the rewards and the punishments? And there's a whole host of them. And there's the model's more complicated, but this is the intuition. Is what's in it for me? And control systems. And what do we want? So then it's our system right now is privileging a lot of articles in certain journals, and you need volume, and people aren't really necessarily looking at what you're saying. They're just looking at the fact that you said it, and we're counting them up. And I was talking 2 days ago with people here about the nature of your promotion system and what it takes to go from a lecturer to a senior lecturer to an associate to a professor and all that, and it's counting, and then the review process, and it's similar but different from what I see in the U.S., but it's out there. So you've got, so then the question, what's the performance that you really want? And so everything we've been talking about this morning is you're going to write something subtle and sophisticated that honors your intelligence and your quest to be a scholar and change the world. But what the reward, the control system wants volume in certain journals. They don't care what you're writing about. Just do it. And so then I'm aware of that. And so then you get some old white guy showing up from across the ocean telling you about, the sacred journey. And you go, this guy's delusional. Look at the world I live in. He doesn't know what he's talking about. So I know that that's out there, and I'm living in the same world. And it's a little bit different. I got the list of the journals that are viable and open to you, and predatory journals, no can do on the predatory journals anymore, and why would you do that anyway? But there's that. In our world, it's a self-sealed logic that in the last number of years, the deans, this is being recorded, they send out a list. They send to the departments, tell us the good journals in your field. Tell us which ones are A, which ones are B, and which ones are C. You tell us, and then we're going to keep track of your ability to publish in those journals that you told us are the top journals. And so we have created, and you got organizations there, we've created a self-sealed world where we are conspiring on our own demise and saying, this is insanity. We're not going to do this. And so some people just say, I'm not going to do this. One department sent in 172 journals. So these are all A's. These are our top journals. And it was, is this go in Africa? Does this have the same? And it was basically to the deans, screw you. Here's 170 of them. We're not playing your game. But then they're relentless. They got power, and then they push and cajole and tell us we all know that the Yale Journal is better than the, whatever, the Mexico Journal, or this bias and xenophobia and all this. But that's out there, and then they created a dashboard straight out of factory physics land, and then we got a dashboard and you put it in, plug and play, and then we send off our publications to the Financial Times, and how many did we get in there, and then that affects our ratings and our rankings, and then that goes up, and then the MBA students want to go to our school over some other school because our rating is higher because we have more journals, and it's this whole crazy system, and nobody theoretically cares. At the very best universities, they still care, and they read the work, and people will get denied tenure with a high volume of papers that don't add up to anything, or that they're seen as pedestrian, or that people are making some subtle distinctions. It takes some real courage to do that, but sometimes that happens. Or they will get tenure on just a few papers that are really subtle and sophisticated and say, this guy's a genius, or this gal's a genius, and we don't care. If the person has 3 articles, that's enough for us. We don't want 10, because they're great. But there's that's out there. So what's happening is we're getting this world out there of this counting mentality that affects our ability to do the work. And you have to publish fast, and you have to publish often. And it's not your problem. It's your problem because you have to live in that world. It's not your problem per se because you don't have the power just yet to change that. But there's a load of people in my position are trying to change that and carve out some space. But it's hard. It's really hard. And so everything that I'm talking about has to happen against the context of those challenges in our world. And then that speaks to, well, then how are you going to do this in that world? So let me just pause there. Is that To what extent is this on your mind? Is this a big deal for you, this control system that we live in? Is,
What what my problem was actually is those reviewing the journals. I don't know whether the system, the journal itself, have a platform where a reviewer will say, "This is my interest area," or "This is what I expect from a write-up." Matching it up with my colleague, two reviewers having opposite side of issues of a particular paper. So if I am presenting a paper and maybe in the area of organizational behavior, then I go through the reviewers and I know that these are the number of people possibly might review my paper. These are their philosophies and their informed positions. Then I could know what I'll be expecting if any of them come across my paper. But if it is just, you just put it there and wait and see what they will say.
yeah.
I think that is a little bit not fair.
Yeah, there's that challenge. Yeah, you'll see the editorial review board of these journals, and then you'll see who's likely to be a reviewer. And then you'll see, entering the conversation, you'll say, well, oh, these are the 5 people that are working in my area. Chances are one of them is going to be my reviewer, and that's probably true. You're also going to get reviewers that are not on the board. They try to get people from the board and then others, and if they're training, they're giving people a chance, or they just need, because there's so many papers come through these journals now. You just review, there's just a flood of them. And then in terms of the accounting mentality, you don't get credit for reviewing. You get credit for publication. So then you get, for the people that care and care about the infrastructure of the profession, they do the reviews and they edit these journals. And then you go and you turn to people and say, would you do a review? And they'll send you their papers to be published, but they just say, I don't have time for this because I write papers, I don't review papers. And then you have that. In finance, as you probably know, for the top journals, they pay you $300 to do a review. And then you, at JFE, you get one review, and they paid that person $300 to do the review. In management, it's all free, but they're scrambling to find them. And so you may get people from different paradigms, and that's back to the beginning. The editors have to exert some judgment. They need to know who's out there, and then and accept papers over the protests. And but then it's back to sometimes the editor's new and doesn't have the confidence to do that. It's a human process. In general, they strain really hard to do well by it, but there's that side of it. Is there's so many papers being published, and you need so many reviewers and so many editors, and the pressures are so high to publish that people don't want to do the reviews. If you have a chance to do it, you're talking to a guy who does this. That's how you learn. Back to Psych 101. It's vicarious learning. I've learned so much from looking at how other people's papers are treated, and it's a lot better to watch how your paper's being treated than to see how my paper's being treated. So if you're a reviewer, you get to see that. So when I do a review, and I'm on a board now, and I do the reviews, the first thing I do when it comes back, because I'll get a copy of the letter to the author and the other reviews, I read my review to remember what I said, and then I immediately read the other reviewers to see what they said, to see what did they see that I didn't see, and try to learn from that. So you can learn a lot from doing this too. But yeah, it's a messy system a little bit.
So before I land finally, for instance, if I present a paper, the framework is okay, I'm assuming. And then the literature review is also cool. But where I take my data and the issue I am dealing with, it's remote in Ghana. How will the reviewers accept or reject?
What does it mean it's remote in Ghana?
Perhaps the issue I am dealing with may have to be with a cultural background that I am coming from, a very small ethnicity, perhaps in where I'm coming from, which you may not find on the internet.
Okay.
You understand? So sure. And the issue is phenomenal in
that culture.
Those people, yes.
Yeah.
And so if I draw those theories to back my argument, but then the data and the phenomenon itself is from that remote area,
right?
Would the reviewers or the publishers accept it? Or
Well, this is back to simple, accurate, and generalizable, or in research method speak, external validity. To what extent, basically, if you take a the positive science perspective, you collected data about some set of issues around culture in a particular context that's remote and unique or something. And so this is back to the conversation about the journals that are looking for transcendent theory and stuff. So then the idea is, what is it about that sample? Can you generalize from that remote, precious tribe that nobody knows about and you'll never find on the internet to the rest of the world? And if it's a phenomenon-based, theory-based that's particular to 400 people out of the 7.3 billion people in the world, and that's it, well, then you got to find a journal targeting those 400 people. But your challenge is to make it relevant, and so there may be, you may find something that runs up against the grain of what's being said across the world from the other 7.399999999 billion people in the world, and here's a section where it's a little different. You say, oh, well, it's not all the same. Then there's some difference, and then you pull on the string, and then then you got to go engage the conversation to show why it's interesting that it's different here than it is there, and then you may go into that literature about the there and say, well, you're actually seeing some variance out there, and because the variance is never explaining 100%, and then you may say, well, some of the differences you're seeing out there are actually reflect what we've seen in this village. And then you might want to take another look at these studies because it might actually reflect this, and then you expand the theory. So you have to make it relevant to the broader conversation. If it's just particularly, in this country, in this section of this country, you have to make it interesting to people that care about other questions. And then, unfortunately, if this country is where you're sitting in this little, what's the tribe in South Africa that people are short? They talk with clicks. They're desert people, San people. The San people, and there's by some sense, what do I know about this? But I'll tell you what I know. But these are people that haven't been in modern capitalism, and they're living in a different sort of economic order, and they're sitting on top of great mineral reserves. And so I met somebody that was doing research on San people as they're encountering the multinational corporations with their eye on their burial grounds and everything else to get these minerals out of the ground, and then how they're getting help from the first world to deal with these people to protect themselves. So then that becomes really interesting because that's an indigenous people living their own life. There's human dignity at stake, but they're sitting on top of $1 trillion of assets that the rest of the world wants. Well, so if you've got a small culture, and then you got something and then how do you protect the culture of these people and honor the power or disabuse the power and tell them to get lost and stay away from their burial grounds? But so there's always a way to make it interesting. But if it's just about that per se, it may not fly, but you got to make it interesting. Okay, a magical mystery tour. So in here, there's this counting mentality. For me, it's that the FT 50 or whatever it is, those are the Financial Times lists. When I was president of the Academy of Management, I got to address the whole profession, and my essay was called "Embracing the Sacred in Our Secular Scholarly World," and saying how can we honor our high aspirations in a world of counting and all of that. And it's a really tricky issue, and that's the challenge you face. I think the way to do this here is you would do that small paper and find someone that will publish it. Try to have a research quest, and you write smaller papers to build your ideas, learn your research capabilities, the craft of research, but see if they can add up to something. And then maybe, I was talking with Moses and Kofi about this at dinner last night. One idea may be, and we can talk about how you might do this, is write smaller articles as you're building, and then learn the craft, understand the phenomenon, understand the theory, and then be pointing try to write one paper that would go to the world, and then And as you're learning that craft, knowing, again, I showed you, it's a 10-page outline. These things take years to write. It can take 3 years to write a paper. And you don't have 3 years to write a paper in this control system. But maybe have your eye on one big paper that you're going to write. And then the question is, how do you do that? As you're doing this work and as you're talking to people and you're meeting people, you have you may be able to use your resources in exchange with other people that have access to money and then talent and publishing this stuff. And this was behind this conference I put on in Johannesburg with the Academy of Management, and I was very aware that, I was trying to see if with complete humility and maybe naivete, the thought was you got 1.2 billion people here. There was 83 people in the entire continent of Africa that were members of the Academy of Management. I know that this is a growth market. I know there are resources. I know there's livelihoods. I know there's a need of all that. And I said, well, what would it like to connect the two? So we had this conference. And the idea was there are people sitting at Stanford and MIT and Columbia and Berkeley and Michigan and Northwestern. They've got gobs of money. They know how to do research. And they're looking for interesting contexts and questions. And my thought was, if we can just marry people that are on the ground here that are plenty smart, that may not know every trick about how to publish, but they've got access to data and really interesting questions, marry it with people that also have interesting questions with lots of resources and research, and then bring people over so they're comfortable here, and then bring you there so you're comfortable, and then we go forward together, and then we teach each other, and then that's I was trying to make the invisible college visible. That's out there, and there are people that you can find in some form. That's one. The other thing you can do that I think that's related to the human extinction and then related to the particular capabilities that I've seen on the ground here is field experiments. And if you'd like, I will have your email addresses. I can send you 3 or 4 articles about field experiments, what they are, how to do them, and all of that. I think, and the world really is really interested in field experiments these days. Like with respect to these grant theories and organization theory, I don't know what psychoanalysis is. A friend of mine said it's like the greatest hits of the 70s. All these major theories were created 40 years ago, and we keep tweaking them, but there's no new one that's out there. But there are practical problems. There's the threat of human extinction, all that. And so there are interventions you can make to try to make the world a better place. And then you do those controlled experiments and collect the data. So there's a paper I just saw. It was published in Science, which is one of the best journals in the whole world. And he was looking at entrepreneurship in Africa. And he had 2 samples, and one was in Togo and one was somewhere else. And he had 2 approaches. It was training for proactivity and initiative training. And then they had another one was training for the basics and the fundamentals of business. And the thought was, what matters more to being a successful entrepreneur? Your self-possession and your confidence and your proactive stance to life, or understanding debits and credits and all that. And then he had these 2 programs of training on both. And then he looked at and he collected data over a 3-year period as to what were the outcomes, the entrepreneurship outcomes. And then he found that, surprise, it was not the business acumen, it was the self-confidence training had more of an effect on the outcomes in entrepreneurial work than not. And then, boom, everybody wanted to know about that. I go, what? That's what's in play more than debits and credits and, and customer segmentation and all that? And the answer was yes. And then he did another study in another setting, and then the results flipped. I go, oh, all right, well, now he's off and running. So why is it that it was one way in Togo and a different way in another way? But then suddenly it's very compelling because people are pouring money in and trying to get the entrepreneur. But that was an experiment, and he was able to do that. And as I've talked to people in the last 6 years in various places in sub-Saharan Africa, people have access to data. They have access to institutions. They could maybe do these experiments and in ways that's maybe harder to do in other places. Maybe you can do that. You partner up with somebody. So as you're doing your work and you're writing those smaller papers and getting your feet wet and being known, meet other people that have the resources, and then you write together. That could be, or you just develop your own capabilities and do it on your own. But you somehow have to handle that. How do we navigate a world where you need to have 2 articles a year just to keep your job? and still try to honor those basic aspirations as to why you want to be a scholar, which is to really understand something, contribute to knowledge, and change the world. And that's our challenge. And we at least have to acknowledge that. This was, I mentioned this at the beginning, why we're scholars. This was, I asked 200 brand new first-year PhD students back when I was the president, and I welcomed them to the profession. I asked them why they were scholars. Then I asked people that we have consortia in the U.S. and a lot of places in the world. You come up for tenure, you get lifetime employment at 5 years. In your 6th year, that's when they make a decision. Do you have that guarantee of work? And we have consortia for people in that period, right at the 5-year period, right before they're up for tenure. So these are people in the maw of they've got to get these papers out with heavy anxiety and all that. And then I asked retired people that had formerly retired, and I asked them, why are they scholars? And then the two big ones were exactly what was said here. It's the life of the mind and making a better world. Those were the two, no matter where they were in their careers. So that's back to the sacred. This is what we got to find a way to honor. Otherwise, this is just a house of cards. It just collapses. It's just nonsense. Here, this guy is he just turned 90. He wrote a very important book with Herbert Simon, the Nobel laureate, called Organizations in 1957. He's a genius, a flat-out genius, and then in all kinds of ways, he's a very compelling guy. And he gave a retirement, I can send you this if you want. He gave a retirement address when he retired from Stanford, and he's still active in what he's doing. Just as an aside about the quality, I know him now at this point. Get this about this man. The guy's incredible. He's 90 years old. His wife of 60 years is still around. And his wife has Alzheimer's disease, the mental disorder and stuff, and doesn't really know where she is. And she's now living in a facility, a mental health facility. He was telling this to people at a table. So if he said it to a table, I'll tell you this. It breaks your heart, or it warms your heart at the same time. She has Alzheimer's. She can no longer live at home. She's in some kind of a memory facility so she doesn't hurt herself. Jim March, every night, goes to that facility and he sleeps with his wife. Up by day, and he does his work, and he tends to his children and his life, and he sees his wife every night, and he's old. I go, wow, what kind of a man is this? It's just an amazing guy. And then I'm gonna, I don't know if you can read that. This was him talking about all the pressures, the instrumental pressures, the utilitarian pressures. And I'm just going to read this. It's just to keep this in mind as we do this work. And it's the critique of the market-based utilitarian approach that we need to research. He says, the university is only incidentally a market. It is more essentially a temple dedicated to knowledge and a human spirit of inquiry. It is a place where learning and scholarship are revered, not primarily for what they contribute to personal or social belonging, but for the vision of humanity that they symbolize, sustain, and pass on. Soren Kierkegaard said that any religion that could be justified by its consequences was hardly a religion. We can say a similar thing about university education and scholarship. They only become truly worthy of their names when they are embraced as arbitrary matters of faith, not as matters of usefulness. Higher education is a vision, not a calculation. It is a commitment, not a choice. Students are not customers, they are acolytes. Teaching is not a job, it is a sacrament. Research is not an investment, it is a testament. And this is him at the end of his career saying, we have to remember what we're doing here. And that's back to the beginning, was who changed your life? You can change lives here. We're not messing around, and so we have to somehow accommodate ourselves to this audit regime and still do our work. Final point about that audit regime, what occurred to me is, at least, I don't know about here, but in the United States, they rate and rank all the management journals. They rate and rank all the business schools. They rate and rank faculty. And then for us, it's the citation counts to your articles matter, not just the fact of the publication. There's thresholds for that. An incredible attention to that. And then I think, are they doing this in the English department or in the French department or in the geography department or the dance department? And they're not. They're doing it in business and some other areas. And they're doing it because what we do matters so much. And what people are just trying to figure out, is this any good? Can we trust this? And so if you frame it that way, it's just people are trying to figure out, is our work any good? They're doing it. It's actually it's a testament to us because they care so much. But we can't let this tear us apart and then start teaching to the test and doing research to the audit culture, because then the whole thing just collapses. And so at some level this may be naive, but this is a giant of our field. And he's saying, as he's still around, but as he's retiring, he's watching what's happening. He says, please, for the love of God, do not destroy yourselves. It matters too much. And so as you're starting, I want to at least put that on the table. And I'm very aware of the accounting culture, but you got to try to honor your high aspirations. Now back to how we conduct ourselves, and then we can talk about whatever we will. There's a book, actually the book is this, The Courage to Teach by Parker Palmer. And so in that book, when he talked about it, he says, good teachers possess a capacity for connectedness. The connections made by good teachers are not held in their methods, but in their hearts, meaning heart in its ancient sense, as a place where intellect and emotion and spirit will converge in the human, and will converge in the human self. And then when you're thinking about the teachers that made a difference to you, those are the teachers. They're not quick and clever and smart. They connected with you person to person. That's what we're trying to do here. So then, of course, the issue is try to be that person as you can. And I know some of you, I know most of your teaching, it's 1,000 people a semester. How am I going to do that? And that's our challenge, is to how can you possibly connect with that many people? And that's a challenge too for the rest of your careers. We have 7 billion people in the world. There's millions of people need an education. And it's best done person to person, heart to heart. How are we going to do that at scale? That's our challenge, to figure that out. But we want to try to do that. Says this builds on a simple technique. Good teaching cannot be reduced to technique. Good teaching comes from the identity and integrity of the teacher. Good research cannot be reduced to technique. You can see it. There's people that are very capable technicians, but research can move you. It can really move you. There's actually there's an elegance to it of a finely crafted article. There's an elegance to simplicity on the other side of complexity. There's an elegance to writing when you're writing and you're on page 3 and you're foreshadowing something, and then it pops up in the results and in the discussion section. There's a beauty to that. And when you'll see it as you're reading it, or maybe you won't because it's so seamless you don't even know it. But when you create that, there's a beauty to that, just like there's a beauty to dance and art and anything else. And you don't know it until you touch it and you go in, but it's actually there. And so you want to try to get that. I forget what I was going to say. Yes. So then the key is you've got to have courage in all this. And here's the challenge that you face. And in some ways, it's a deeper challenge than the sacred and the secular and accounting versus the other one. Is if you're going to be a good teacher, you've got to put yourself out. Your head, heart, soul is there. You're connecting with that person. You're trying the very best you can. And then what happens? Many of you are teachers. You get teacher evaluations, and they say, you suck. I hate you. Or, whatever. You get that stuff. And if you're trying, and especially when you're early in your career, or any time actually, and you think, because you watch people when they become senior, they lose the touch, and it's hard to connect with people 30 years younger than you, and they're giving it their all, and then they say you're a terrible human being and all, because they have high aspirations, or they're flailing and they blame others and all, and so it's how do you go forward when you're putting yourself out there and then you get bad reviews. You might find it interesting. This is one, there's the link, the link's not there, but you can find it. Wharton, which is, the university top, one of the best business schools in the country, et cetera. A few years ago, what they did is they created a film where the professors, these are Wharton professors, top of their game, top of the world and all that, were reading their reviews, the comments from their students that were really mean-spirited, destructive, and hostile. And so you've got the faculty member reading these reviews, saying these really despicable things about that person. And it's a film of all of them reading these reviews. And you realize there's a humanity here, and that there's a responsibility for students not to do this as well. But that's, and then when you search for this, and you'll see it on YouTube, then you'll see all these other schools started doing it, and you'll see faculty at other places reading these reviews. But many of you teach, but you know that's out there. So you have to have the courage. That's why that book is called The Courage to Teach. The courage to still try to be fully present, put yourself out there, when you're likely not, you're going to get this. It really hurts. Now you go to the other side. That's a review I got recently for a paper. That one's pretty good. Actually, it's only 8 pages, single-spaced. But you work on a paper for years, and you put this thing out, and you try your best. All the work over this little paper, this review paper, this doctoral student, and we'll do it. The reviews, we'll get pages of reviews that say, you stink, you're stupid, this is terrible. Again, it's the integrity. You're in there, you're all in. You're right at the frontier of your knowledge and frontier of your ignorance. You're trying really hard, and they say you're stupid. Kind of hurts, So the joy of this whole profession is, it's manifest, it's palpable, it's Jim March, it's the joy of knowledge and discovery and changing the world and all of that. And then you're fully in, and then you get feedback that's very, very hurtful. And then the question is how do you pick yourself up and keep going? And it can be hard. It can be really hard. But you got to know it's coming, and you disassociate, and then you take it as look for curative and palliative cure. But you don't take it as a personal indictment of you, that you're doing the best you can, and you try to go forward. But we're all human, and you get that. And so I want to put that on the table too, that you got to learn how to go forward. And in that context, you need some courage. I was going to go there, and it even gets, well, maybe I'll forget it. I'll just, you got to be. I think that's, be good to each other. Not so. When it's like that, when it's that fraught, there's a temptation of you start blaming other people. You circle the wagons. You protect yourself. When you've made it, you pull up the bridge behind you for the people behind you. It's a competition. I have more papers than you did. When you go at these big meetings, I've talked to people, and again, when I had that job, I got to meet all these people. There are senior people in our field. They go in and they cry at these meetings. They stay in their room. They can't come out. It's just so hurtful to be in there, because people, they're under threat, they're under anxiety, and when you're under threat, you start tearing other people down to build yourself up, and then you're insecure because you've been told you're stupid, but you have some papers, and so then you end up arrogant and patient, and you start demeaning people that are junior to you, and you start saying you're better than other people, and then there's a sense of, if you get to be a professor, do not kick the lecturers around. If you were a lecturer, help them out just like somebody helped you out. And then I love this, there's nothing noble in being superior to a fellow man or woman. True nobility is being superior to your former self. That's who you compete with. Don't compete with other people. This is not a competition. We're all in this together. But it's because of that pain, it's really easy to start demeaning others, or taking pleasure in your own success, and that does not help us at all. I'll give you that site, and this is, maybe it's a placeholder for the conversation. It's a paper entitled, can't even read it. It's about mental health problems among PhD students, and it's a study done in Belgium, a very sophisticated study looking at the mental health problems of PhD students. And PhD students are at high risk for depression and mental health problems. And it's what it is. And they used, so you got supervisors that go all back to the comment of, you're archaic. You tell a supervisor they're archaic, and then they get and then they may be archaic, and they stay up at night and they worry about it. But they got a mother that's sick, and I got to work for 3 more years, and they're hanging on. And then they diminish you because you had the nerve to say you're archaic. Everybody's human and stuff. So it could be that. There's also like in my world, if you're interested in the human condition and the subtleties of the human condition, you're very attentive to the human condition. And there may be a selection effect. The people that are depressives often see the world more acutely than people that are not. You know, the people that like a six-pack and a speedboat, like to run around and have some laughs, they're not paying attention to the subtleties of the human condition. But the people that are may find themselves depressed in some ways. So there may be some issue there. But they've done these studies, and they're trying to figure out why. But PhD students, and it's also long, you're personally involved, long cycle times to do this. The feedback is iffy. You're hanging in for a long time. It can set yourself up for a lot of anxiety and problems. And so, again, I can give you the article. The site's on there. It's on you can read it easier on the PDF that you'll have. And you can read that, but it's really important for us to be good to each other. So you want to be good to each other in terms of just the arrogance of success and a world of struggle and comparing others. But people are actually in pain out here too, and acknowledge that and be good to each other. So back to the very beginning, when you're telling each other your stories and finding your research quests, you're also building community where you can actually be there for each other and help each other out. You can't do this alone. That's all I want to say. And so that's it. You got to stay calm in the face of all of this. And I do believe we have of all the professions in the world, who wears a robe? Who wears robes? What? Not police. They wear uniforms. Lawyers or judges. So judges wear robes. Who else wears a robe? Yeah, barristers. You know, the professors wear robes. So justices, professors, priests, holy people. So there's basically holy people wear robes, justices wear robes, professors wear robes. These are kind of sacred professions, as though we have a responsibility in society. We carry the culture forward. We are a window. We are the source of understanding. The understanding can breed progress of the human condition. It may forestall extinction. Back to the beginning, our work really matters. And so, as I say, keep calm and make history. Our work is really important. It's actually sacred. You're wearing that robe for a reason. So as I know you're in this world teaching, many of you as lecturers, and now you're trying to get the doctorate and hone that skill. So as someone who's been doing this for a while, and I just want to, and from on the other side of the ocean, I'm paying attention to what's going on here. I'm paying attention to your future. I want to, as a senior person and as a former president of the Academy of Management, I want to welcome you to our profession to the extent to which I can. It's honestly, it's a total privilege to walk through life with you, and I want to stay in touch if I can. And I hope you're rooting for me, and I'm rooting for you. And let's do this together, all right? And be good to each other. So, all right. Oh.
But maybe after the lecture, we have to visit Pantai to check our mental status.
In terms of our time, I was told that you have something to do at 2 o'clock today. I don't know if that's true or not. Maybe I'm happy to hang around, talk about anything, or I'm happy to, for the love of God, finally shut up. Or somewhere in between.
I'd like to know whether you would like to pick what you made us write, or it's just for
No, I want to collect these. No, I want to collect. Yeah, thank you. I want to collect all of these. I'm going to, in time, I'm going to content analyze the way you want to be a professor. I will look at the attributes of the teacher, and it'll take me. And then, so long as your penmanship is good, I will then create an email list, and I will send this back to you. And I may send you a couple more. I may send you some field experimentation articles. I may send you some stuff that I can get through. But you have not heard the last of me. I want to share this with you. So yeah, if you can just somehow pull them to the sides or give them to me, as the case may be. Thanks. I'm done.
Substandard biography.
There is one other thing I had for you if you want. If anybody wants to hang around, I grabbed, just last night, I just grabbed 3 articles that are sitting back there on this computer. If you want, I can just show you just as to how they set up the articles. And just, when I say, deconstruct the setting, if you want, I can just sit and we can find a monitor that we can read. Maybe that one's better. But and then we can just go paragraph. They're just like the first 2 or 3 pages of some of these, and just say, look at the moves, look at what they did, and then and again, just to show you how you do that. And then when you get done, depending on your field, accounting is different than finance, which is different than operations, which is different. See how they do it. But you got to learn how to. You're going to have a lot of this as you just teach yourself. And so you want to be able to deconstruct the structures of papers and all of that. Just like I came up with the recipe for the discussion section. That's just from looking at them over the time. But if you want, I can pull up some of those papers for anybody that wants to hang around. I can show you that, but that's, or not. But if you want, okay, we got one person. I'll do it for you. Okay, yeah. You want to? Okay, so I'll go behind I'll just put one up there.
Please. Hello. Is there anybody who can interpret this for me? Is there anybody who can help me, because I need interpretation after the...
I swear.
Rocky, what is your problem?
The accent is...
Also, Pobia, your poem, or better, I see. Or better, I see. Sound of a soccer.
You went too free.
Okay, this is going to be a little gruesome because I can't scroll with a mouse. It's click by each. So this is a paper that was actually fairly influential, in fact, and this is a corporate governance paper. And what they were looking at was the relationship between the narcissism of the CEO, the personality disposition of narcissism, and how that affects company performance. And then narcissism is usually assessed by a therapist in conversation, and then they had to come up with so the contributions here are a couple. They had to come up with a methodology to assess narcissism from archival data, and as best they can to validate that. And so that was kind of interesting. And then they had to say why they think that if you have a CEO with a certain kind of personality orientation that's narcissistic, which is actually interesting given the President of the United States, and then what effect that might have on a firm. That's in terms of strategy and economics. There's always these studies of variance decomposition of this firm performance, a function of the environment, or the industry, or the firm, or the individuals. And so you're trying to say that the individual, one person matters, and then they're trying to tie it into the personality of that person. Okay. And then in terms of what's interesting, I won't show you this, but they came up with an interesting method to do this, and they looked at, well, it's right there, the prominence of the CEO in press releases. And so they looked for the CEO talking about I, as opposed to we in press releases. And the sense is if in the press release you're seeing a lot of I's over we's, that's a narcissist. They had the other one, well, that's the first person singular pronoun in, oh, it was interviews, sorry. So it was the extent to which they talked about the CEO in the press release. I'm sorry, I shouldn't read it. The second one was the use of I's, first person pronouns. And then the one that was really kind of interesting, and I could show you in another presentation, is the pictures in the annual reports. And they said, okay, if you have, they coded it up, if it's a picture of you as the CEO by yourself, that's greater than half a page, a full page picture of yourself in the company's annual report, narcissist. If there's no picture of you at all, you're invisible. It's not that. And then they had, it's a picture of yourself and it's less than a half a page. So one would be 4 is full page by yourself, greater than a half a page, less than a half a page by yourself. Then a full page with others. But you're still in there, or smaller page with others. And so if it's a small picture with you with a whole team, then you're not as narcissistic as a big picture of yourself out there. And then they took these things and then put them all together to get a measure of narcissism. But here what I want to do is show how they set this up as to why you'd want to be interested in this study. And then here, the paper I read the last night for you, this is me in yellow, just highlighting it just for my own. So this is not to point out what's being said. This is just what caught my eye. But let's just go by this just as you work through it. Researchers at Strategic Management here found that top executives have a great deal of, inject a great deal of themselves into their decisions and leadership behaviors. So they're asserting, back to the variance decomposition, that there are people in strategy and organization theory that say individuals matter. There are people in other people in organizations, or there are economists that say it's all market conditions, systematic risk. There are industry characteristics. But he's saying there are people that say individuals matter. That's the first sentence. And then he's citing Carpenter and then Glaskwitch, and then you could see, the next one is, the top is Glaskwitz again. And then they cite people that do it. And then they say they've examined how the characteristics of top management teams affect behavior and performance. And then there's a bunch of studies. While others have focused on how the characteristics of CEOs alone influence what happens to organizations. So there's groups and individuals, but people have looked at it. So they're saying implicitly, this is back to shared common knowledge. I know we're looking at individuals. We're not looking at industry structure and the like. And that people are saying alone and together, people have looked at this before. So they're acknowledging that people have looked at this before. And then it says, although prior research has generated a wealth of insights about how executive characteristics are manifested in organizational outcomes, almost no attention has been devoted to one of the most vivid qualities seen in some CEOs, high levels of narcissism. Journalists, other analysts, citizen observers often comment and usually bemoan the narcissists, and then they quote popular press of these business leaders. At the same time, some writers point to the benefits, I can read this, of narcissism. So the narcissists are visionaries. They can make them excel as innovators. When somebody else said, why do we go along for the ride with narcissistic leaders? Because the upside is enormous. Then it says, apart from the qualitative descriptions, however, organizational researchers have not systematically examined this fundamentally important executive trait. So there, what he's saying is individuals matter. They've actually studied qualities of individuals. And then this is actually this could have been actually done better to say what they are. But he rattles off some articles. And so this is back to the assuming common knowledge is what Weersemann, Bantel, and Eisenhart, and Schoenhoven, and Iaquin, that that stuff. To do it better, if I were doing that, I would say that there have been studies of executive characteristics on performance, such as intelligence, locus of control, this or that, and then you put the citations in. It's a little better to say what they've actually done. But they're signaling it, but they're saying that nobody has looked at narcissism. But they say from the journalist accounts, narcissism matters. And there's a difference of opinion that they say narcissism matters, and then there's a difference of opinion. Some cases they say they're a problem and they're a hazard. In other cases, they're the ones that have guts and they're bold and they're innovative. So it's situated. Individuals matter, different kinds of personalities. No one's looking at narcissism. And then in the press, we're interested in this. The world is interested in this. And it goes positive and negative. Is this a good or bad? Okay. Then he says, highly narcissistic CEOs defined as those who have very inflated self-views or are preoccupied with having those self-views constantly reduced. Long sentence. So you got that dash. It could be saying, highly narcissistic individuals can be expected to engage in behaviors and make decisions at the next page, but they put that dashes in the middle and they define it. So remember I said the second column is define your terms. So he's doing that very quickly. And this is actually foreshadowing as to what comes later in the paper. But right there in the third paragraph, or the second paragraph of the paper, he's sneaking in a definition as we go forward. And then it's saying, after that can be expected to engage in behaviors and make decisions. That's right at the thing, with outcomes that matter. But no attention has been given to one of the most vivid characteristics in some CEOs, high levels of narcissism. So it's saying, we know it's out there. We know it can matter by anecdote. No one has ever researched this. And then he's citing it all the way along. But notice this is this 2 paragraphs. And so he said a lot as you're going in there. And then you can follow along and go, okay. Now, if you're a reviewer and you may say, oh, yes, they have. And then you say, here are 5 studies of narcissism. Then he's blown out of the water. But he's done his homework and he knows there are no studies of narcissism. And in part because it's hard to get the data because you need an archival measure of narcissism to look at this across the hundreds of CEOs, which is where he's coming with this. But there you go. And then it says, okay, whoops. Those are very good. They may at least be there may be at least 3 reasons why researchers of top executives have not undertaken research on narcissism. First, they may believe that narcissism, derived that it is from Greek mythology, is fanciful or a lay concept not grounded in good psychological science. But psychologists have extended the psychoanalytic concept of narcissism to the realm of large sample psychometric analyses. And then he starts citing work in psychology to say that that's true. Research has shown that narcissism is a personality dimension, not just a clinical disorder, and that individuals can be reliably rated on this continuum. So he's starting it saying there's 3 reasons why it hasn't been done. People think it's from Greek mythology and it doesn't exist. Yes, it does exist. Here's the psychological research. And by the way, it's not a malady. These are not clinically sick people. This is in the population. There's a continuum. And so you can assess this on a range, foreshadowing that he's going to have a continuum assessed on a range. It's high and low narcissism. That's one. So he's identified the criticism, and then he's addressing it right there. And this is only the 3rd paragraph of the paper. They wanted to do this. So I told them we were done, and they said we wanted to do this. So, okay. 10 minutes? Do you need to go? Do you have a meeting? All right. I will send you this paper. We got to go. I will send you this paper. But what I'm doing is just point by point, you can see how they set it up, and he's anticipating the critique, and he's in there. He's got the definition, and then he's got the second one as to why it hasn't been studied. And he asked and answered. Then there's the third one of why it hasn't been answered. And then he goes on to say we've done, and you just watch how he's doing it, and it's just clear as a bell. Boom, bada boom, bada boom, bada boom, bada boom. And you get done, and you go, all right, show me the evidence. And so it's do that, and then look at working papers of people and some others, and you'll just see that there's a linear flow, and it's just nice and crisp and clean, and you don't see that often in other papers. And then when you see those, and the last comment I'll make is in there where it says about setting the hook, they review a little essay. They reviewed the authors of 10 award-winning papers that were celebrated, and then they asked them, how many times did you write the front end of this paper? And on average, they wrote it 10 times, trying to get this right, to be really clean and clear. But go to the very best journals and watch what they do, deconstruct it, and then try to mimic that and be as clear as they are. But there's a craft to this. No one tells you about the craft. You'll just go through and go, yeah, that's it. I can do that. But it's a skill unto itself, as is tucking in your shirt when someone's taking your picture. All right, I'll see you.
All right. I think I do another one for him. Thank you very much. Yes. All right. The owners of this place are asking us to leave because they have a board meeting here. So there wouldn't be any room for questions and discussions. But tomorrow we are starting at exactly 9 o'clock. The three of them will be here, plus the Dean of Business School. So there are several other issues that we'll be tackling. I remember when we met the DBA student, I made the announcement that, he's talked about a lot here, especially getting into fabrication. I remember when you met here, I said that those of you interested in working on a paper should contact me and we can start something. Till now, nobody did that. So if you don't start it now, you never get started. So it's important that you just put your neck into it. Once you have made that decision, you need to start as early as possible. Otherwise, there's nothing more humiliating than finishing your PhD and you cannot publish. People will start pointing at you. Look at him, he has PhD and he cannot do research. People are suffering from that. So it's better you start now, so that before you finish, you have 1 or 2 papers, so that nobody can say that he's finished PhD and he cannot publish. Okay, so we'll end it here, and tomorrow, please be here on time. We start at exactly 9 o'clock. Thank you very much.